Hello, and thanks for joining us. We're starting with what they call a national event here in France. The latest book by the controversial French poet-provocateur Michel Houellebecq hits bookshelves this week. It's called Anéantir, which translates as Annihilate. He's idolised as France's biggest literary export. He holds up a mirror to the grim truths of contemporary France. In a moment, we'll speak to Professor Russell Williams from the American University of Paris, who's read it. But first, let's find out some more about the author said to give a unique insight into masculinity, France, Islam, sex tourism, and the human condition.
On November 8, 2010, Michel Houellebecq obtained France's highest literary prize, the Goncourt, for his book, The Map and the Territory. Ultimate acknowledgement from his peers after years of divisive reviews.
In fact, it's embarrassing to be liked more abroad than in one's own country. There's something not quite normal about it. The balance isn't quite right. Let's just say my fans were getting angry about it, so it was about time.
Translated into more than 40 languages, Houellebecq is a popular literary export. In his work, he often depicts Western decadence and the loneliness of the modern world from the point of view of a depressed male anti-hero. All of this with a pinch of humour.
He makes fun of himself all the time, which isn't unpleasant.
At least it's original. It's especially funny when he kills himself off in excruciating ways.
It's funny to make myself die. It kind of relaxes me.
Barely hiding under the surface of his self-deprecation is a complicated relationship with his hippie mother. Houellebecq was born as Michel Thomas in 1956. Not long after, his parents sent him to live with his grandparents. The start of his documented contempt for his mother and the reason why he took on his grandmother's maiden name for his artistic pursuits. Primarily a novelist, Houellebecq has also delved into poetry, music, films and photography.
At times he can be a pessimistic artist, worried about the state of the world, but there's no cynicism, not a hint of meanness in his work, just a sharp vision.
Others, though, could interpret it as a disenchanted vision. His latest political thriller, Anéantir, or Annihilate, describes once again a world without much hope. But this time it's tinged with love and compassion, unveiling a new side of Houellebecq's work.
Well, Professor Russell Williams from the American University of Paris is here on the line. Hello, Russell. Thanks for joining us. Now, there's been a massive print run of 300,000 copies of Michel Houellebecq's eighth novel. It's his first since he was bestowed France's highest national honour, the Légion d'honneur, for his services to French literature by President Emmanuel Macron. Now, why are his books always considered national events?
Wow, what a question. There aren't many writers writing in French today that do what Houellebecq does. Houellebecq likes to describe himself as bringing uncomfortable truths out into the public domain. And those uncomfortable truths can be about the modern world. They can be about sex. They can be about consumerism. They can be about religion, particularly Islam. His novels talk about the things that I think people like to talk about, but don't necessarily see reflected in their bookshops on the shelves of their local librairies. So he's very much he's got his finger on a pulse. He starts conversations. People either love Houellebecq or they absolutely despise him. He gets people talking. He reflects the contemporary conversation. And that's not always easy reading, but it's easy to form an argument. And you've always got something to talk about when after you finish reading a Houellebecq novel, that's for sure.
So he braves subjects many novelists would never dare to write about, and his narrators are often depressed, misogynistic and homophobic. What can you tell us about the new book?
The new book isn't going to cheer up anybody's rainy, gloomy Januaries, that's for sure. In many ways, this new novel is contingent with what Houellebecq's done before. What is Houellebecq known for? Well, Houellebecq is known for dramatizing aging, depressed, alcoholic, sex-obsessed narrators that may or may not be thinly veiled avatars for the novelist himself, right? There's always this feeling when you're reading Houellebecq, when you're reading his characters, that you're kind of into an encounter with the gloomy, pessimistic figure of Houellebecq himself. He does that in this novel, that's for sure. The central protagonist, the central character is a guy, however, called Paul Raison, who is a high-ranking civil servant in the French Ministry of Finance, right? So far, so familiar. What Houellebecq does a little bit differently in this novel is it's not as provocative as his previous work, or provocative not in the same way, I would say. The last couple of novels, Soumission, that came out in 2015, was a novel that came out on the same day as the Charlie Hebdo massacre and was a novel about Islam. It was a novel that kind of was much discussed, much debated, and was incendiary. His last novel was about Michel Houellebecq himself. It was a kind of really disappointing rant about basically him not getting enough sex. This novel is slightly more delicate. This is a novel that takes the political thriller frame and then juxtaposes it with a story about the protagonist's father having a medical incident, having to go into a nursing home, which leads to a big rural family drama. It's a kind of strange mashup between family melodrama and political thriller. And there's a strange subplot as well about a weird, zany terrorist organization that is attacking France and French interests around the world. What I think is really interesting about this novel, however, is it's political, but political in a different way to his previous works. It's a deeply conservative novel, whereas his previous books might have been a little bit more reactionary or inflammatory. Where's the politics in this novel? Well, it's not the politics that we might be expecting. It's not the right-wing Eric Zemmour style firebrand ranting that we've seen from Houellebecq before. This is actually a consideration about getting old, a consideration about dying. You know, the title translates as Annihilate, as you said. You could also translate it as Exterminate, as my friend Louise suggested to me. But what isn't being annihilated? What is being exterminated in this novel? It's life itself. This is a novel about death. This is a novel that considers how we treat old people, the elderly in our society. This is a novel that talks about the failures in the French nursing home system. This is a novel that talks about euthanasia and associated politics. It's possibly Houellebecq's bleakest novel so far, but I think it's one that's very, very good.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you for talking to us, Professor Russell Williams. It's not going to cheer us up this Friday. Next, we're heading to Paris's Quai Branly Museum. It's hosting an exhibition of 150 masks, sculptures and decorations from southwest Congo. Out of the Shadows dives into a little-known art world. The unique pieces give a glimpse into the region's cultural history. Peter O'Brien takes you on a tour.
Pende masks are among the most iconic examples of Central African art. But there's much more to it than that, as this exhibition on southwest Congolese sculpture aims to show. People from more than 8 different cultural groups carved their stories into these statues, masks and other decorative works. Stories, for the most part, not yet told in history books.
The masks were mostly used in public ceremonies, so they're easier for ethnologists to understand. On the other hand, many sculptures and statues came from ceremonies which were more private or discreet, so we know less about them. Some objects reveal an older history, showing that African history isn't synonymous with colonialism.
The exhibit recognises the gaping holes in our knowledge about what many of these works were used for or what they signified, but it does offer some clues as to what life was like before and during the colonial period. Many of the pieces are totally unique and have rarely been put on display since they were collected in the 19th and 20th centuries.
Mbala sculptures are quite varied in posture and body language, but this example of a man holding a woman in front of him, both carried on a litter, is unique. There are no other examples.
This Pende statue is one of only 3 like it in the world. It was a powerful object, believed to be controlled by a spirit, and able to pass judgment on whether someone was guilty or not. More than anything, this exhibition at Quai Branly reminds us that the history of African art remains a vast area for further research.
Just before we go, it's been nearly 3 years since a fire ripped through Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Now that the 12th century monument is secured, reconstruction efforts are underway. The progress has been captured by comic strip artists whose work is on display at the foot of the church. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for being with us. Remember our website, we're also on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.